All right, guys. So we'll kick it off here. We're here all today because of the Empower Your Career Conference. That's an event that's going this whole weekend, and I really want to say thank you to Victor and the 365 Saturday folks to putting this on and making this available for everybody. It's a crazy time right now in the world, and for them to be able to just put their heads together and make something make this opportunity happen. It's a big deal, not only for the people in my spot where I've been doing this for some time, but also for the people that are just trying to learn something new, or they're also a technologist, and they're just want to ramp up their skills. So want to give a quick shout out to them. Thank you to them for putting this on. All right, and we're here today to discuss Power Automate to Logic Apps. So the session objectives will be to learn about Power Automate, learn about Logic Apps, and then learn why, when, and how to use both of those products. You can use them side by side, and we'll talk about some things that I've done in the past there, or you can use one or the other, just depending on what you're going to need. All right, and then feel free to speak up, whenever you have a question during the session. This will definitely be more of an interactive type of session versus me just communicating out. So speak up whenever you feel free. The agenda then would be we're going to run through the intro and overview. We'll talk about Power Automate versus Logic Apps, ways to convert your Power Automate to Logic Apps, and then we can run through an example. And then if we have time at the end, we'll do a demo, and we want to make sure that we leave time at the end for questions as well. A little bit about myself. My name is Anthony Escobedo. I'm a technical architect over at Concurrency in Wisconsin, in the United States. All things tech, I really enjoy, if I have any free time, I'm either on my computer, one of my computers anyways, and I'm always just kind of browsing the web and wanting to ramp up my skills as well. So, I definitely feel for you guys, being here today and spending some of your free time, updating, anything that you can about your knowledge with, these products. Travel enthusiast. So a little bit about myself then. Delay. I had a delay in Taiwan for 24 hours, so that was my longest delay. I've been to Cuba, Costa Rica, all over Europe, Denmark 3 times, Mexico, and I want to go to Greece in a couple of years. So things like that's pretty much what I do when I'm not doing tech or I'm not with my family. So that's kind of where I'm at. When it comes to tech, cameras and photography and videography, those types of things are really what catch my my attention there. But otherwise, when it comes to my daily job and my day-to-day, I'm working in Office 365 and more on the productivity side. So Teams, OneDrive, SharePoint, Power Platform, and things of that nature. And here at the bottom, you can see that it's my Twitter handle. You feel free to follow me. I tweet out as much as I can, just kind of keep everybody up to date with the things that I'm doing and best practices that I'm running into, or retweeting other people that are also doing the same thing. So feel free to follow me if you'd like. So we'll dive into the Microsoft Power Platform. You may have seen this in the past, but I added one piece to this where you can see the Logic app symbol going right over Power Automate, and we'll talk about why that's there. The Microsoft Power Platform itself is, it consists of Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power Virtual Agents. So they recently added the Power Virtual Agents, and those recently, went completely GA. So that's great. And then below there's the CDS that's been around for some time. Typically that's been used more traditionally with the dynamic CRM. But now it's all of Power Platform that's really diving into all of that. Data connectors, that's a part of all of these as well. And then AI Builder, with the latest and greatest in that, there's been 4 or 5 of those AI builders that now went from preview to GA in the last couple of weeks. And they pulled in a few more cognitive services into that AI Builder as well. So a lot of these things are they're not the same product, and they don't necessarily do the same things, but they play very well with each other in terms of either automating or assisting each other with completing, a solution that you would build for a business need. And again, why this Logic app is kind of hovering over that Power Automate. Logic app is kind of like the older brother of the Power Automate. So Logic apps just having, that extensibility, that business to business mentality versus Power Automate, more of that internal, facing type of solutions. All right, we'll just keep cruising here. Power Platform momentum. So there's a few things on here. I just want to focus on a few of those. So API calls for Common Data Service in the last month. We talked about the Common Data Service in that last slide a little bit, but it's really important that we understand what that is from afar. It doesn't mean that you have to use it. It does cost an extra license to use the Common Data Service, but there's huge advantages to that. I could go on a list about that, but we won't dive into that too far. But 485 billion API calls to that, meaning that it's widely used, and businesses are adapting to that, and it can be very powerful once you start to dive into that. So the majority of my Power apps and my Power Automate and my Logic apps now are starting to dive into the CDS versus your SQL databases and such. Just having more of that functionality in-house and providing additional functionality on top of that. And then again, being a part of that Office 365 ecosystem. All right, and then over here, 4 billion Power Automate runs each month. You can just tell the adoption's there. If you were to have something like that running in an on-prem server or something like that, I'm just happy that Microsoft is running that, and we don't have to worry about that on the back end. I haven't had any, issues with that, but Microsoft has been doing a great job. 2.5 million monthly active developers on the Power Platform. That's why I'm here today, being one of those developers, and then also communicating with you guys as you guys get into that stage. Being one of those developers is 2.5 million active developers in a month. That's incredible. So just, happy to be here as a part of that community. All right, and we'll dive right into Power Automate. So what is Power Automate? It is a service that helps you create automated workflows between your favorite apps and services to synchronize files, get notifications, collect data, and more. That's kind of the textbook version of that, but really what it's going to be able to do is help you connect these two, seemingly separate apps, and you're going to be able to automate that using Power Automate. So if you have something in SharePoint and then you want to get an email, or if you have something in OneDrive and you need to copy that to SharePoint, different things, different reasons why you would be using Power Automate, but just knowing that that is there to connect, these completely separate products, whether it's in Office 365 or you're going to be tweeting out every, list, and you're going to be, if you have a SharePoint list that's out there and you have, a date that you want, those tweets to be posted, you can have those types of columns and metadata set up so that every day at, noon or whatever time makes the most sense, Power Automate can kick that out and tweet for you. So there's, just being able to connect these completely separate products, I think, is really what I'm trying to drive here. And there's different ways to connect with Microsoft Power Automate. You can do it through the web browser and in their mobile app. And then just to kind of run through this here, we have creating new flows. In the web browser and on mobile, you can grant approvals both in those. Monitor the flow activity. So if there's one that had failed and you got an email about it, you can go and double check, hey, why did this fail? So maybe somebody didn't put in the correct answer, or they, it failed for some other reason that, you need to just kind of take a peek at that. You can do that through the mobile app. Discover buttons, again, that's another important thing. If somebody shared a button with you, a button flow, what that's going to be is if you were to trigger a Power Automate, you can hit a button on your mobile app, and then it kicks off that flow right then and there. So ones that I've seen in the past is, hey, I'm going to be busy for the next hour. I'm running late. I need to mark that on my calendar. You just hit this button and it'll mark, a half hour on your calendar that you're busy. So just kind of, being proactive there. Then the next one here is use button widgets. Same thing there. The ones that you've created, you're able to use those. Get push notifications. So if you wanted to notify people in an email saying, hey, I'm going to be late to a meeting, you push this button and it says, if I have a meeting right now, email those attendees and let them know that I'm running late. So that would be another easy way to just, instead of going in there, going in your phone and then having to, open up all these different things, you open up the app, push a button, and it automates that process for you. So there's a lot of different things that you can do here with both the web browser and the mobile. As you can see, the mobile does pretty much everything that the web browser does. And actually, one funny story here is that my son had a swimming lesson at one point. I think it was last summer. And so I'm there and I'm going every day with him. And one day I just couldn't finish my Power Automate flow before I had left for work, or before I left work to bring him to a swimming lesson. I mean, it's right down the street, so I could have brought my laptop, but I chose to download the app and I brought that with me. And while he's practicing swimming, I'm on my phone and I'm actually building this very powerful Power app. I mean, there's over 100 actions in there. So basically the meaning to this is that on your phone, it can be just as powerful as in the web browser. And the experience actually is, I don't know if it's better, but it's definitely, up to par. Because, when you're in the web browser, sometimes you click on, you're adding an action and you want to edit some of the dynamic data in there. You click a button and it'll open up in the web browser and it'll show you this pane on the side there, this pane that pops up. And it doesn't give you a good view sometimes because it'll be like overflowing into the, off the screen or something like that. You got to scroll over the place, but in the mobile app, it opens up right in front of you and it makes logical sense. So yeah, I think the mobile app is up to par. And if you guys haven't downloaded that, then I would certainly say just, maybe take a peek at that and give it a try. All right, on to the next one. Just to show you here, just the mobile app, what it would look like if you were to push on a button here. It's as simple as that. It's a big, easy button. You click the button and it kicks it off right then and there. So just wanted to show you how easy that could be. And for approvals, of course, in Microsoft Power Automate, that's one of their huge pieces there is that it has approval and it has those rejects right inside that app. Power Automate is known to, fix these business needs that are out there. And what they're solving here with the approvals, the approval action, really what you can do is send anybody in your organization saying, hey, I'm working on this. The approval has to go to my manager, so please approve my time off. That's what they're doing here. And if I were to go in there and then hit approve, it would bring me to a comment section where I can say, yes, I approve this, but please, let me know if you have an extended stay for some reason, or then that comment would get shipped to them via an email. So just knowing that this is in that mobile app and you're easily able to go in there and mark those approvals, this is actually a big plus for Power Automate versus Logic Apps, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. All right, so what makes up a flow? We have talked about a few of these things a little bit now, but the trigger is what's gonna start this. There's many different triggers here. That manual via button, that's what we were just talking about in that last picture. It shows that button that you click on that can be actually in your web browser or on the mobile app, but it looks a lot prettier in your phone. But otherwise on a schedule, so every week at noon or every weekday at noon, kick off this workflow and run. You could do things like that. Or if, a new file is added to SharePoint or a new file is added to your OneDrive, do this certain thing. Or if a new email with an attachment happens, do this type of thing in the cloud. So those are what your triggers look like. There's a ton more out there, and I would definitely recommend you guys going out there to take a peek at that. That's out on the Power Automate site. So that would be really easy to just kind of go out and see and understand what those triggers look like. Same thing with actions here. There's over, I think it was, when it comes down to it, there was like over 300 or 400 different actions at this point. The one that you see here is send an email. And that's going to be coming from your Microsoft. So if you were to say, send it to the CRM owner, it's going to look like it kind of came from Microsoft in that point. So some people have a gripe with that specific action, but typically what I like to use is the Office 365 mail connector instead of this specific connection. So just this specific action, depending on what your need is and what you'd like to do, those DLP policies, that we'll talk about in a moment, but that can help solve that problem. All right here, and where do these apps and flows come from? So Power Apps and Power Automate provide customization in Office 365 and Dynamics 365, so kind of keeping those a little bit separate. Dynamics is its own little world there, and Office 365 and the ecosystem. You can connect pretty much anything that you want, including Planner, Teams, and anything else that you would have to, automate. You can tie those things certainly together, but also in third-party apps too, like I mentioned earlier with Twitter and other, third-party apps there. They came out with a bunch actually recently, and a ton with Azure. So take a look at those. All right, and then individuals can sign up and learn to test out. So this isn't something that you need a specific account for, whether it would be in your company's environment. You could always create a specific environment for yourself. I personally like to build trials. They last 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, depending on where you're signing up. But the 30-day trials, I don't mind them. I can go in there, mess things up, and then delete them whenever I'm done, or they get auto-deleted, and then there's no harm, no foul there. Power Automate and Power Apps community plans. So there's also those community plans that are out there, so you can kind of develop in your own environment without issue. So, and actually that's something that's very great to have in these environments, that as an end user like yourself, you'd go in there, you can create your community plan. And then what that does is it creates a developer environment. And not to dive too far into the different environments in the Power Platform, but the environment itself is a development plan, and it's a development, environment. And what you can do there is, create anything that you want pretty much in that, within the means of, your DLP policies. The only thing that is unfortunate is that you can't share with anybody, but it gives you that development area where you can go in there, again, mess things up and then delete it and have no harm, no foul. Or if you want to, export those types of things, whether it's your Power Automate or your Power Apps, you can export them and then import them into a production area or, what have you in your default area. Power Apps and Power Automate, there are paid licenses for that, just depending on, what your need is there. If you were to be using some of those Azure functions or Azure actions, that's where that would come in. Also CRM actions. They recently put in the SQL connector that would be also in that plan. So pay attention to those premium ones. You're not going to be able to use them if they're paid and you don't have that paid license though. So it's not really that big of a worry if you're just an end user, because you have access to only the things that, what your license allows you to, so you won't be spending, money on accident. All right. So moving on to Logic Apps. So what we'll do is we'll dive in then, just like we did for Power Automate, and jump right into Logic Apps and kind of just walk through that and what that looks like. So the definition here is a cloud service that helps you schedule, automate, and orchestrate tasks, business processes, and workflows when you need to integrate apps, data systems, and services across enterprise or organizations. So I think it sounds very much like that Power Automate definition. So in my mind, they're very much alike. Again, the Power Automate is kind of the little brother of Logic Apps. So here, I think the key words that you would see are enterprise or organizations, because those two words are really going to be driving the enterprise apps and the organization apps, because in Power Automate, yes, you can rely on those to be your enterprise apps, and that's when you put those Power Automates in your production area and not in your default environment. But here, your Logic Apps is pretty much always ready for enterprises integration, or have an organizational app be attached to that. So that's where you're going to see a lot of those integrations and third-party services that come into play here. All right. So a little bit about Logic Apps. It's a serverless technology. I think that's probably the most important thing here, is that we don't have to have, spin up some server that's going to be, running this information. It's not attached to your specific user like it is in Power Automate. So that's why we talk about this being a little bit, disassociated from the Office 365 ecosystem, and then also being a serverless technology. It's an event-driven scale and abstraction of servers. So just kind of, again, if you're going to be running a Logic App, it's event driven, and it can scale with no problem. It's built for enterprise, and it makes it really easy to track, what those events are that you're going to be driving there. And it actually has, I feel like it really throws it in your face exactly what you're doing all over the place, because they want you to know, what your logic app is up to. It's very powerful, and it's very accessible. So they know that they have to, let you guys know that, hey, this is what's going on in your logic app. Faster time to market. So again, you could go full custom code on this and build, somewhere else, and not use logic apps. But what logic app is really good at is, building that rapid development, so that if you're going to be building some large app that needs full enterprise integration and, business to business connections, this is where you're going to be doing those types of things. And you're going to be focusing on that business logic. Again, same thing as Power Automate. I would say when you focus on business logic, you're going to understand those requirements and, work with those end users that are actually going to be using this, whether it's the data or kicking it off, or, looking at the output of this. Ultimately, you want to make sure that you're meeting those needs, and you have to do that for both Power Automate and logic apps. Awesome. And micro billing. So here you're going to see a per action billing. So on the trigger and those actions that we talked about earlier for Power Automate, that's the same thing that's happening here in logic apps. There's the actions, and then there's the trigger, and basically you get charged every time that would run. But I have a couple apps that are out there right now. One's a provisioning app, and that one specifically, it costs 2 cents to run every time I run it, and I run it a couple times a day. And at the end of the day, it's pennies to the dollar when it comes to billing at the end of the month. So it's really not expensive. But if you were to be doing this huge program that's out there and running it every 10 minutes to make sure that if you're it's a stock market and the stock price drops, and there needs to be something that specifically happens there, this is where that could get a little costly. Or if somebody accidentally sets something up like that. So you might want to set up an alert for something of that nature in your Azure subscription, that if the billing goes over this price, that I want to be alerted, because someone could accidentally create something like that. However, in order to have a logic app, you need to have an Azure subscription, and you need to have your credit card in there. So there really won't be too much of a mistake in there, unless you're giving access to the wrong people and they're unsure of what they're doing. So in either case, you probably still want to set up those alerts and monitor that as well. And then again, back here with the reduced costs, it can be inexpensive the way that you build it, but it does, you want to take that logic into play here, because let's just say you code something and it takes you 30 lines of code, and then you run into an advanced developer and he says, oh, you know what, I know how to do that. It only takes 1 line of code. So, if you look at, executing 20 lines of code versus the 1 line of code, it would be a lot cheaper to run that one advanced line of code. So I think just, bouncing that off of, other IT folks, or, doing that, advanced research before, putting this into production, just making sure that you know what you're doing there and can reduce the costs. So running a lean logic app, in other words. So Azure Logic Apps, again, it can connect to the on-premise. It's a hybrid and cloud applications. It can run mission-critical and complex integration scenarios with ease. It's built for these different integrations. So if you're connecting to Salesforce or Box, again, those are out in Power Automate, but they are, they give you this very packaged solution on what you can do with that. Here in Logic Apps, you can really dive into, anything that you would need to do there, and it's pennies on the dollar. So build smart integrations, leveraging machine learning and cognitive services. We talked about that a little bit earlier, but just being able to, drive that scalable integration there. So if you were to be using machine learning to best understand, data from 100 million customers, lines of data, that machine learning is going to be able to drive that through Azure Logic Apps a lot quicker than, it would be able to do anything like that in Power Automate. So that serverless technology really coming in handy there. Cognitive services, there's about 20 to 30 that are out there, about 10 of them that are in preview/GA for Power Automate. And that's where the AI builder comes in. But the cognitive services have been built in Logic Apps first, and that's where you're going to see those could really come in handy if you want to do like sentiment analysis on, if you're getting tagged in something, your company is getting tagged in something in Twitter or on LinkedIn, and you want to understand, hey, is somebody mad here? Are they tweeting that, that this is not, a good service that we're providing, or they're not getting the service that they would expect? You can get alerted if the sentiment is not at the level that you would expect it to be. All right, so we're going to now jump into what that would look like when Power Automate versus Logic Apps. If we were to say, which one are you going to use and why? So here, they're both tenant-based, so they are attached to your specific tenant. They're shared connectors. So if you're looking at, the SharePoint connectors, or you're looking at the OneDrive connectors, email connectors, CRM connectors, and the planner connectors, things like that, you're sharing a lot of those same ones. Not every single connector that is in Power Automate is in Logic Apps and vice versa, but the majority of those do play nice with each other. They're both browser-based, so it's easy to access. The great thing about Power Automate, obviously having that mobile, but either way, you can access them in the web. Continuous updates. So one great and not so great thing about this is that they're always updating. And let's just say you're using an action, and it's a V1 action, meaning that it's the email action. And this has actually happened to me because I've been in Power Automate for so long. You would create that action, and then you'd come back in a month later, and then there's like a V2 that's out there of that specific action, giving you more features. You just have to go in there and then add that new connector, and then you would just be able to plug that in and then delete your old one. So it's great because it does add those updates, but sometimes you have to go back and rework a few things, and that's okay too. But it's we're fortunate to see those updates come through automatically. Visual business process automation. So I think that this is really important too, is that from either an end user's perspective, or even if you're a coder and you just want to see what's going on, you can see how long it takes for in your Logic app for it to get from one action to the next, and you're able to see where it's currently sitting, or who if it's sitting on an approval, then you can kind of dive into that and say, okay, now I know it's on an approval, and I can go look at my approvals and make sure that I take care of that. So it's very visible, what's going on in your process automation. Enterprise grade governance on both sides of the fence here. You're going to be able to see that enterprise grade governance, where on the Power Automate side, you have your DLPs and your other ways of administrating those. They've come out with a lot more settings, with the new admin center for the Power Platform, and then also with the Power Automate admin center specifically. So there's a lot out there that both of these have. Logic Apps just giving you a little bit extra there. All right. So that's kind of the how they were very similar, but here is how they're different. Power Automate being a software as a service. What that means is that it comes with that E3 license, and it's important to recognize that we're paying somebody else to run to have this specific product up and running at all times. And I think that they guarantee it's like 99.99% of the time that they guarantee up. If you have an E license, it varies. If you're on the free license, they actually don't guarantee anything, which I thought was kind of funny. But in either case, they do a great job, and I haven't really seen too many of the hiccups. They do have templates in Power Automate. That's great. You're able to go out there, and I would say if you're starting a new Power Automate, you want to automate something, I would certainly start in the templates area first to see, hey, has somebody done something like this before, or is there something else like a template that I could start from, and then you can refactor that, or delete some of those pieces, and then move forward from there. It can definitely streamline your build there. The mobile app, we talked about that. You can create, manage, and respond and run different Power Automates in there, no problem. Modern approvals in Power Automate. If you get an approval sent to you that you have to approve that specific request, so you can also do it in the app, you can do it in the web browser, but you can also do that in your email, and you just click a button right in your email, and that's only if you're online that you're able to do that. But you click that button, and then it just basically just flips the switch, and it responds to the approval, and there's nothing else that you need to do. Here is the environments and DLP policies that we had mentioned. Environments are great, and the DLP policies are great at governing those environments. So there's a lot of different types of environments that are out there. It's up to 4. There's developers, there are productions, there's sandbox, and then there's the default. So certainly, different reasons to use the different ones there, but Power Automate taking advantage of those environments. And same thing with the other Power Platform products. DLP policies, to dive into that just for a second here, you're able to then govern how people are able to use those connectors and transform data inside those environments. So if there's an environment that's for production and it's your enterprise apps and you need to allow people to, send things from their OneDrive to SharePoint, and then from SharePoint it needs to send an email, and then from an email it needs to send to your ERP system or something like that, and you don't want other people to be able to do that necessarily, you can have an exception DLP policy that's out there that can kind of cover that and then give that environment that right to do that. Otherwise, the people that are in the default environment, or which is the one that comes with your tenant by default, they just wouldn't be able to do that, and it'll block them from doing that and give them the reason that there's a DLP policy from preventing them from doing so. You can run these Power Automate as a user, so whether you're the person that's logged in and you're running through that Power Automate, but you can kind of also pin one of those users to specific actions as well. But mostly you're going to be running that Power Automate as yourself. So you need a license in order to run Power Automate. And typically those come with those different licenses. Simplified analytics. So here with Power Automate, the analytics itself, I think they've done a great job of understanding what is important to the people. So they look at what are your environments, what are your DLP policies, what are your the connectors that people are using, how often are these flows being ran, and things of that nature, where they really just dive into what would be important as an admin to understand how people are using this system. There's multiple licensing schemes, and I won't dive into that too much, but that is something that we'll want to cover here in a moment, and I'll just kind of show you what that looks like. Create in many areas. I think that they've done a great job updating of where you can create these flows. At first, it was only in the Power Automate admin center, in the maker there, but now you're able to create them inside the Power App portal. That's awesome. Inside SharePoint, you can click a button and then it'll just pop that right up. You can create approvals and other things of that nature. They recently actually submitted for hub sites as well, if you guys are familiar in SharePoint, that now if you're going to be connecting a site to a hub site, that it can go through an approval process based on Power Automate. So they're kind of really, digging into the Power Automate themselves and helping themselves, push out these advanced features that allow, different approvals and different things that can really help an enterprise system, administrate itself. So they're really, talking the talk and walking the walk there. And then also their latest development is in Teams. You can also create those Power Automates in Teams, making it really easy and accessible in there. So again, always evolving, and that's the great thing about it, is that it's really making it accessible for all of us. UX flows and business process flows, that also falls under the Power Automate umbrella, where the UX flows themselves, if you guys aren't familiar, this actually just came out to GA, I think this last week. UX flows does something similar to Power Automate, but really, if something doesn't have an API like Power Automate or Logic Apps, doesn't require, but you can also do custom actions to access those specific solutions. But UX flows actually is totally technology agnostic. It can be hooking into pretty much anything on your desktop. Really what you'll see is your cursor going around and clicking into specific things, dragging and drop things. You can kind of record your actions on the screen. And then what that'll do is it can do that 100 times for you if you're going to be, bringing some records from, your Excel document to your legacy solution. If there's no API to connect to that legacy solution, even if it's on-prem, this UX flow can really dive into that and then create that automation for you. So super powerful, just came out, and I would totally highly recommend that you guys go check that out. Business process flows. This is something that's native to the CRM and in Dynamics, where you have a set process of doing something. So let's just say you're doing an asset check-in, you're in IT, and you want to say somebody checked out a projector. So here's where you would start. This is what you're checking out, and then here's your receipt. And then when they check it back in, here's they have that last process piece to do. It just kind of walks them through an entire process, and it also can involve different parties at different times. So maybe the end user won't see how it's involving other parties, but that business process flow can also do that. So convert to logic apps. Power Automate just doing a great job of grabbing what's inside those flows and then bringing that right up to the cloud and the logic apps and converting it there. So let's just say, Power Automate, you're doing great, but I need something better than this, and I need to extend it even further, with a business-to-business connection. So I'm going to bring that up to logic apps, and now you can just basically export that and then bring that right in. And we'll kind of talk about the caveats there. Office workers, this basically the Power Automate is geared towards office workers, those business users, citizen developers, and IT devs. The reason why it's so broad is because Power Automate really, you can do basic things in there, like, send an email whenever I get a new, list item updated in the SharePoint list, or, whenever there's a new Teams chat that comes through, or you can be a citizen developer and really be tying, 6 different products together and saying, if this happens or this happens, kick off a flow that would do, that would meet with IT, then it would meet with marketing, and that would do all these different types of things. And you can even have, HTTP requests that gets into the more heavy dev side. So as you can see, it can get pretty extensible once you're ready to do so. So here is the Office 365 suite features. It comes with all of these different licenses. As you can tell, I told you we were going to talk about this for a moment. You can see here that the Office 365 business user here, that's the only one that it doesn't come with. So that's the only one you'd have to purchase something for Power Automate, but separately. Otherwise, there is that elevated license that you could purchase if you need more flows or more runs or more storage capacity. There's reasons that you would need to upgrade your Power Automate to that license. Also, if you're connecting to CDS, that also requires that license, that elevated license. All right. Here are what those templates look like. As I mentioned earlier, you can kind of go in, you can see the different categories that are up there. So all flows, featured, approval, button, data collection, email, and so forth. A lot of these are going to be really, basic most of the time, but basic is nice because it gives you that framework. It's not saying it's going to solve all your problems, but it can kind of help you get started. All right, here and then just another picture of what those mobile phone app would look like. There's those buttons again that we talked about earlier, very important. One thing about those buttons is that those buttons don't transfer over to Logic Apps. So if you were to grab a flow that was kicked off by a button, that would not transfer over very well with Logic Apps. That actually fails. Same thing with approvals. Those also fail in Logic Apps. So there's reasons why people would start in Power Automate and then maybe even just kick off a Logic App after they get done with their Power Automate flow. So just depending on, what you're going to be doing, there might be a mix of the 2 different solutions, or there might be a reason why you would just go with one or the other. Awesome. Now let's go over the Logic Apps. So this is integrated platform as a service. So it's a little bit different than that software as a service. Here you're seeing that the extensibility and the enterprise version, that's what kind of like that platform means to me, is that it's saying that, hey, here's your baseline platform, not just saying, hey, here's your package solution. So a little bit of a difference there. Consumption price model, we talked about that already. Requires Azure subscription, we did talk about that, but ultimately you need to have your credit card basically inputted into there in order to be able to take advantage of this. So it does not come with your tenant. Logic App Designer, very similar to what you're going to be seeing over in Power Automate. Visual Studio Designer, this is awesome, especially for those heavy dev coders that want to be able to take advantage of version history, and you're going to be bringing something from your dev environment to your test environment and then to production. This is where that Visual Studio Designer plugin will really come in handy. Simple Azure integrations here, where it's built in the cloud. So as you can imagine, it's just easier to integrate with these other products that are already out there. And we'll talk about a couple of those in a moment. Detailed analytics. We'll see a screenshot of that here, but most importantly is that you can really see at a high level what's going on with your flow. How long are people holding onto those different emails, or how long is it staying in a certain stage? Because when it stays in that stage, it's prolonging that process. And really why we're even automating things is because we want to make this process as lean as possible. So we want to expedite that. And if we're seeing that it's getting stuck in a stage for 2 days, we want to really understand why is it getting stuck there, because maybe there's some more work to be done. advanced security, it already being in Azure and, it can take advantage of that advanced security, whether you're working with business to business or you're working just internally. There's a lot more security options there available for you. As to where Power Automate, you're kind of limited to, the makers, the makers and the users, and then the DLP policies. So you just have a few options there, but as where with Logic Apps, you're able to see, a ton more of that security come into play here. Outputs. So you're able to kind of log those outputs, and you're also able to work in your Logic app and then work with external party, whether it's your Azure function. So if you have an output here, then and you want to send certain information from your Logic app to your Azure functions then executing something like C# or JavaScript or PowerShell, and then actually executing some very specific code, it can get those variables from your Logic app, and that's what those outputs look like. So it playing well with others and being able to send information back and forth really well. Your enterprise integration pack, really what we can see here is that it's going to store your map, like your store maps, your schemas, your partner agreements, your certificates, and driving that integration account with other business to business connections. So again, it really driving that enterprise wide. So let's just say you have your corporate services that is here in America, and then you have something that would be over in Europe, and you need those two to talk really well with each other because this is an enterprise app. This is where you can store those agreements in that specific area so that you know where everything is at one time, and then also you can store those passwords in there too, so that you have to worry less about security and things of that nature. You don't have to hard code those passwords or work through a specific user. Sometimes you need to have those out there, especially when executing those Azure functions and such. Polling triggers and push triggers. So that's really similar to how Power Automate works, but the polling triggers themselves, you're going to see that it's a reoccurrence trigger, just like the automated triggers in Power Automate. It happens on a schedule, and it just kind of checks on a regular basis. What's going on? Do I need to start any movement here? The great thing about it being in Logic Apps specifically, though, is if you're running on a database and every time a record gets updated, something needs to get checked, and there's 5,000 of them, and that's at the end of the day, you can run that, and Azure will scale to that, no problem. If you were to do that in Power Automate, you're going to run into some issues where you're going to be running out of flows. You're going to be, running into capacity issues, logging issues. That's really why you're going to be able to drive those Logic Apps forward with this. Also, push triggers. What that's going to be able to do, it's something that triggers your Logic app. So it's event-based. Power Automate does the same thing. Here, it's more code-based, I think, where they're looking at if there's an HTTP request that it can start this Logic app based on that, or if there's another type of request that comes through, it can check for those, or it can get pushed to those, and it'll kick off based on that event. Here, we're going to be looking at only IT devs, pretty much. I think you could have citizen developers in there, depending on how you categorize those. Excuse me. Those citizen developers could be, very extensible in your organization, depending on how that framework is built. But ultimately, you're looking at those developers that are going to be creating those enterprise solutions. All right, and we're looking at the why here. So advanced diagnostics and analytics. This is why you would be going over to Logic Apps. Those alerts, you can set those alerts at an enterprise level, saying if somebody's going over this price, why is it happening this way? Because I need to understand that. If we're going to be paying buku bucks there, let's make sure we're understanding why we're doing that. Metrics. So like I mentioned earlier, advanced type of analytics there. It connects with that Azure Monitor as well. So it looks at the enterprise as a whole, but it also can look at those run details as well. And we'll see a screenshot of that. Error handling, very specifically, if something happens, you can set an alert on that so that it kicks out and lets your administrator know, or maybe a business user know that, hey, they filled something out wrong. But in either case, error handling there is you can do very advanced error handling there. Azure Security, it ties in very easily with Azure Key Vault. Again, with the different type of coding, a lot of times you have to integrate passwords with PowerShell or with C#, and the way that you can do that securely is through Azure Key Vault. So using that, that's also a paid service that you would have to have out there, but again, it's pennies on the dollar every time you use it. So if you're using it a couple times a week, not a big deal, but it does secure those passwords and those credentials. very tightly so that you don't have to worry about those in the long run. Same thing with the integration service environment. So a little bit about that is that in Azure, you're kind of working in that tenant. It's a shared server that's out there somewhere in Microsoft land. But if you want to work in somewhere where that there's some compliance reasons that you cannot share that data, and you need to make sure that it's living on its own little island. That's where these integration service environments really come in handy. It'll have its own proprietary tunnel to your environment, and you're able to then store information in that area where it's not sharing a server anywhere. It has its own specific area of storing that information. So again, you're just kind of mitigating that risk there. And those two things could be that driver for going to logic apps, specifically, based on compliance and security. Timer-based processing, again, just that automated processing. We see that a lot out here in logic apps. Just wanted to call that out. And then segregation of solutions. Really, what that meaning is, if you have your logic app out here in Azure, you can give advanced security rights. You can do, you're that owner as the IT dev or as the global admin that you have access to those specific things. It's important that you sometimes when even for compliance reason that you have that divide between what people are seeing and what they're working with and how that data is getting stored and how it's transferring. So having that segregated solution. Also AI cognitive services, just tying in there again, those cognitive services can drive a ton of different automation and AI types of services there. And then also data-driven results, being able to tie that into a Power BI dashboard very easily, having those log analytics that are out there, just being able to do that really quickly and easily, and making that accessible is important. All right, so just kind of showing you what those the run details look like here. So this is kind of what I meant by metrics. Is this is one specific run that you're going to be able to see here that 4 of those actions succeeded and 1 failed. So ultimately, I think that we're able to see how long each action took. You can see there that there's 30 milliseconds that one took. There's one that went up to, let's see here, what is that, 50 milliseconds, and other ones that took, under 10 milliseconds. So you can kind of see, hey, is this pretty regular that they're going at this rate, or why did that one take 40 milliseconds? I don't think that it should be taking that long. So you can kind of run through those different types of things pretty easily. I'm also just saying the start and end date and just having those outputs there at the bottom. Again, if you were to say, this is the site that's being created in my provisioning app, and this is now the new URL that's created, this is the hub site that it's being attached to, things like that, where you're going to be able to drive and understand exactly what this logic app actually did during this run. All right. So here, this is what that full integration pack is going to look like. If you were to be creating an integration count up front, you can add partners in there if you wanted them to, help integrate some of this stuff or, edit that. But having those agreements that are in there, those other artifacts that you want to store, and then you would create your logic app, and then basically that links directly to that integration account, and then you can start building the logic app with those artifacts, and it's built in and it's ready to go. So it sounds kind of scary saying integration account and business to business. It sounds more scary than it really is. This just kind of drawn out that it can be more simple than what it sounds. Here are those cognitive services. I think this is a really important time to just kind of dive into those. There's the computer visions. There's the face recognition. We're even tying in some of those face recognition into Power Apps these days. It's pretty cool to see what the community is doing. Let's see, speech. That's that sentiment that we talked about earlier. You can do translation, text to speech, and then just looking over here, there's a ton of different ones that you can take advantage of. And again, piece by piece, I feel like these are going as those AI builders. So it's pretty important that we're keeping an eye on what Azure cognitive services that are out there, because then we can start to take advantage of those. We can do that already in Power Automate. We can take advantage of these by calling those out, but they're going to be more built in and packaged up like the other Power Automate solutions. All right, here, so I know I only have a few more minutes, so I'm just going to quickly go through this here. So when you would be doing that, you have environments in your DLP policies, you have templates, we talked about those. It'd be important to have those templates out there. Both sides do have that, but the Power Automate is going to be taking the lead on that. Depending on the builder audience, you're going to have those business users or those citizen developers out there that are going to be taking advantage of that. And then your limitations here, as we talked about, the flow button, Power Platform specific triggers like approvals, those types of things that will be going through that. The how on how we would be converting from Power Automate to Logic Apps. So now that we've learned all about those tools, this is what it's all about now is, when and how we would be able to do that. So your Visual Studio add-in, you can actually convert that. You can bring that, that export from Power Automate directly into your Visual Studio add-in, and it'll convert it for you, and then you just connect it right up to the cloud. You can use your Azure Portal Logic App Designer, and you can use Visual Studio Code, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's only the code-based version of that. So here's 3 ways on how to make a flow. Again, we talked about that a little bit earlier, so we'll skip over that one here. But this is how you would then convert that specific flow. So you can go and open up your portal, your Azure portal out here. You would basically type in Logic Apps up at the top after you having creating your resource group, create a new Logic App. And then from there, you would want to export your Logic App, and then you can import that right into that portal, and it'll take you through those steps. You'll want to reconnect those connectors, and it's as simple as that, and you're ready to go. If there's any red that comes up, then you just work through that. I mean, they all play nice with each other, and you can kind of figure out what's going on there. I've had it in the past, and you just work through it. As far as, let's say one of those connectors didn't transfer over properly, you can just go in there and fix that up so that you can either take that out or you can move forward with that. So we won't run into the demo right now. I was going to do that upgrade for us, but we'll run into questions real quick as we only have, I think, 2 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions that they want to talk about real quick before we end the session? I'll give you a minute or two before we close out. Looks like I have a chat here. Yes. Can you use cognitive services from Power Automate? Yes, you certainly can. You'd have to call it. It's going to be part of that elevated license plan that you need to do, but you would have to call it, through those API calls that you'd have to, take advantage of those advanced, connectors that are out there, and then be able to code that into your solution. So no problem there. Yes, you can do it, but it does take a little bit of more elbow grease because, it's that package solution versus that platform service and not being in Azure. Also, so we have support here saying that the recording will also be available on the 365 Saturday YouTube channel. So I'm sure that you guys will all get an email about that, just letting you guys know that that's out there. Any other questions before we close out? All right, well, I will take that as we're good to go. So thank you for coming to the session today. Really appreciated it. Let me know, reach out if you guys have any questions. Please feel free here to fill out this survey here. So just if you take the QR code here, you can then go into the survey and then take a peek at that and fill that out for me. Thank you so much for coming and really appreciate your time. And I hope to see you guys again. Thank you.